Welcome to Russian Khton. Today's story about a concrete empire, a husband's betrayal, and a brilliant trap inside a decaying Soviet sanatorium. Let's begin.
To understand the sheer magnitude of Alina's empire, one had to understand the chaotic alchemy of Russian business in the early 2000s. While other girls her age were dreaming of marrying oligarchs, Alina was standing in freezing warehouses on the outskirts of Moscow, arguing with truck drivers and customs officers. She had built Vanguard Logistics from a single rusted Kamaz truck into a freight empire that moved millions of tons of cargo across the largest country on Earth. She was 38, possessed eyes the color of winter steel, and wore her power like a tailored suit. She was a woman carved from ice and reinforced concrete, but even concrete has stress points. Alina's weakness was her husband, Anton. Anton was Vanguard's commercial director. He was 4 years younger, devastatingly handsome in the soft, manicured way of a man who spends more time at the barbershop than the gym. He smelled of Tom Ford leather and expensive espresso. Alina had married him out of a desperate, hidden exhaustion, a desire to have someone else share the crushing weight of her crown. She thought she was buying a partner. She didn't realize she had adopted a parasite. The illusion shattered on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Alina had left the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper of Moscow City, only to realize she had left her encrypted security token on her desk. The elevators silently whisked her back up to the 54th floor. The office was dark, save for the golden strip of light spilling from underneath Anton's heavy oak door. Alina walked silently across the plush carpet. She reached for the brass handle, but the words filtering through the polished wood froze the blood in her veins. "She's flying to Dubai on the 12th, Anton's voice murmured, low and velvety. "We execute the Rydersky Zakvat while she's in the air." Alina stopped breathing. A Rydersky Zakvat, a raider takeover. It was the classic nightmare of Russian business. It didn't involve men with guns anymore. Modern raiders used forged documents, corrupt judges, and shadow-holding companies to steal a business out from under its owner in a matter of hours. "Are you sure the board will back you?" The second voice belonged to Vika. Vika was Alina's personal assistant, a 22-year-old girl with aggressively plumped lips, doe eyes, and a mind as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. "They'll back whoever holds the majority," Anton chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "I've already transferred 20% to the Cyprus offshore. I just need her to sign the holding restructure authorization. I'll slip it into the routine vendor contracts tomorrow. She never reads the mid-tier operational files anymore. She trusts me." A soft, sickening rustle of clothing. A giggle. "And then?" Vika whispered. "And then, my love, Alina becomes a minority shareholder with 0 voting rights in her own company. We bleed the main accounts dry, file for bankruptcy, and leave her with the debts. We'll be in Monaco before she even realizes she's destitute." Behind the door, Alina stood paralyzed. The betrayal didn't just break her heart, it violently detonated her entire reality. She had pulled Vika out of a miserable provincial town, paid for her university. She had given Anton his life, his status, his Rolex. Alina didn't storm in. She didn't scream. The predatory instincts that had kept her alive in the 90s kicked in. She backed away slowly, retreating into the shadows, and took the elevator down to the underground parking garage. Her hands were shaking so violently, she could barely unlock her Mercedes. She pulled out onto the wet asphalt of the 3rd transport ring. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the headlights of oncoming cars into blinding smears of neon. Her chest heaved. The sheer, suffocating injustice of it blinded her. She didn't see the utility truck merging into her lane until it was too late. Alina slammed on the brakes. The heavy German sedan hydroplaned, spinning wildly across the slick asphalt before slamming side first into a concrete bridge pylon. The airbag exploded. The world shattered into white light, and then absolute darkness. Alina woke up to the smell of iodine and bleach, the sterile, humming silence of a premium private hospital room pressed against her ears. She opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Anton. He was sitting by her bed, holding her hand, his face a perfect mask of tragic, cinematic concern. Vika was standing behind him, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, looking appropriately tearful. "Alina, God, Alina, my love, you're awake." Anton breathed, pressing her knuckles to his lips. You had an accident. You hit your head. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Alina looked at his soft, manicured hands. She looked at Vika's perfectly applied mascara. A wave of pure, concentrated hatred rose in her throat, so acidic it tasted like copper. She wanted to rip her IV out and strangle him with the plastic tubing. But then, a brilliant, terrifying, desperate plan formed in the shattered fragments of her mind. If she confronted him now, bedridden and concussed, she would lose. He was the commercial director. He had access to everything. She needed time. She needed to disarm him. Alina blinked slowly. She pulled her hand away from Anton's grasp, her face going entirely slack. She widened her eyes, filling them with the raw, unadulterated terror of a lost child. Who? Alina whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. Who are you? Anton froze. Vika dropped to Lily. Alina, darling, it's me. Anton, your husband. Alina shrank back against the pillows, pulling the blanket up to her chin, her breathing shallow and frantic. I don't know you. Where am I? What is this place? Why am I here? The doctors rushed in. After hours of flashing lights, MRI scans, and endless questions, the chief neurologist, a serious man with a gray beard, pulled Anton into the hallway. Alina strained her ears to listen through the cracked door. Retrograde amnesia, compounded by psychological shock, the doctor murmured. Physically, her brain's swelling is going down, but psychologically, her identity is fragmented. She remembers basic functions, language, but her personal history, her business, her marriage, is a blank slate. She is in a highly vulnerable, suggestible state. When Anton returned to the room, Alina saw it, the flash of predatory, unrestrained joy in his eyes. He didn't see his wife. He saw a winning lottery ticket. The trap was sprung 2 days later. Anton sat by her bed, speaking in the slow, condescending tone one might use for a toddler. Alina, sweetie, the hospital bills are very expensive, and the company, Vanguard, it needs to keep running so we can pay for your care. You understand? Alina, playing the terrified, naive deer, nodded slowly, her lower lip trembling. I don't know how to run a company. I'm scared, Anton. I know, baby. I know, he cooed, pulling a thick stack of papers from his briefcase. You don't have to do anything. I just need you to sign this General Naya Doverenost. In Russia, a General Naya Doverenost, a general power of attorney, is the most dangerous piece of paper in existence. It is a blank check for your entire life. With it, a person can sell your apartment, drain your bank accounts, sell your business, and legally represent you in every capacity. It just lets me handle the stressful things while you rest. Anton smiled warmly. Alina looked at the paper. It took every ounce of her iron will not to spit in his face. Instead, she took the pen with a shaking hand and signed her name. Her signature was intentionally messy, frail, lacking its usual aggressive slant. Good girl, Anton breathed, snatching the paper back. But Anton, Alina whispered, looking around the stark white hospital room. I want to go home. I want to remember. Oh, the doctors say the city is too stressful for you. Anton sighed, exchanging a quick, triumphant look with Vika. I found the perfect place for you to recover. A quiet, private sanatorium in the woods. Absolute peace. No phones, no internet, no stress. You'll heal there. He was burying her alive. He was sending her to the glush, the absolute, deafening middle of nowhere, where she couldn't interfere, couldn't accidentally remember, and couldn't contact anyone while he dismantled her empire piece by piece. Okay, Alina whispered, letting a tear slip down her cheek. If you think it's best. The sanatorium was called Zarya, Dawn, located 300 kilometers from Moscow, deep in the dense, suffocating pine forests of the Tver region. It was a decaying monument to Soviet architectural grandiosity. Massive neoclassical columns flanked the entrance, peeling white paint, revealing gray concrete underneath. The air inside smelled sharply of camphor oil, old parquet flooring, and the inescapable scent of boiled cabbage. The lower halves of the corridor walls were painted a sickly, institutional oil green, a staple of Soviet hospitals designed to hide scuff marks. Alina was stripped of her designer clothes and given a shapeless gray tracksuit. Her phone was confiscated per the doctor's strict isolation protocols. She was essentially a prisoner in a museum of depression. Her days were strictly regimented. Breakfast was diet number 5, unsalted oatmeal and a weak, lukewarm compote, a drink made from boiled, dried fruit. Then came the endless, bizarre physical therapies, magnetic rings, sulfur baths, and electro-sleep machines that looked like medieval torture devices. It was designed to break the spirit. For a week, Alina played the role of the quiet, confused invalid perfectly. She shuffled through the faded green corridors, staring blankly out the window at the endless wall of black pine trees. But beneath the blank stare, the shark was wide awake, circling the cage, looking for a way out. She found it in room 42, physiotherapy and massage. The man who ran the room was named Mikhail. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they belonged to a lumberjack, not a medical professional. He had a rough, unshaven jaw and dark, deeply cynical eyes that seemed to have seen every variation of human misery and found it all incredibly tedious. "Lie face down," he grunted during her first session, pointing to the vinyl massage table. Alina complied, maintaining her fragile, trembling persona. Mikhail poured a generic massage oil onto his massive hands and began to work on her neck and shoulders. His touch was shocking. It wasn't the soft, pampering rub of a Moscow spa. It was clinical, precise, and brutally efficient. He found knots in her muscles she didn't know existed and dismantled them with surgical precision. "You're very tense for a woman who doesn't remember having any problems," Mikhail observed dryly, his thumbs digging into her scapula. Alina stiffened. "I'm just frightened. Everything is so unfamiliar." Mikhail paused. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly whisper right next to her ear. "Listen to me, madam. I spent 15 years as a trauma surgeon in a city hospital before the corrupt chief doctor framed me for a missing equipment budget and ruined my license. I have seen people with actual brain damage. I have seen genuine retrograde amnesia. You have the pupil dilation of a perfectly lucid, highly stressed woman who is faking it. So, you can drop the Bambi act. I don't care who you are hiding from." Alina froze. Her heart hammered against the vinyl table. She calculated her options in a fraction of a second. She could deny it and risk him telling the head doctor, who was undoubtedly on Anton's payroll. Or she could gamble. In Russia, you sometimes have to rely na avos, on pure blind luck and the desperate hope that the universe will catch you. Alina turned her head, looking up at Mikhail. The trembling, frightened deer vanished completely. Her eyes turned back into winter steel. "If I drop the act," Alina said, her voice dropping its high pitch, becoming low, raspy, and commanding. "Can you get me a phone with internet access?" Mikhail stared at her. A slow, genuine smirk broke across his rough face. "Depends. Are you going to get someone killed?" "No," Alina said coldly. "I'm just going to ruin their lives." Later that evening, after lights out, Alina sat in Mikhail's cramped, claustrophobic staff room. They drank incredibly strong, pitch-black tea from a thick Granyonyi Stakans, the heavy, faceted glass tumblers that have survived in Russian institutions since the Soviet era. Mikhail slid a cheap, battered Xiaomi smartphone across the small table. "It's a burner, untraceable, but the cellular signal here in the Glush is garbage. You have to stand by the window and hold it up." "Thank you," Alina said, wrapping her hands around the hot glass of tea. "Why are you helping me? I could be a criminal." "Because your husband came here to drop you off," Mikhail snorted, taking a sip of tea. He wore a Brioni suit and spoke to the nurses like they were stray dogs. "I hate guys in Brioni suits. And you look like a woman who builds things. I respect people who build things." Alina smiled, a genuine rare expression. Over the next 3 weeks, that cramped staff room became her war room. While Anton thought she was staring blankly at pine trees and eating unsalted porridge, Alina was coordinating a silent, devastating counteroffensive. She contacted Igor, her personal corporate lawyer. Igor was a bulldog of a man who had been with her since the early days of fighting off thugs in the 90s. He owed his life and wealth to Alina. "They're moving fast, boss." Igor's voice crackled over the terrible cell connection. "Anton called an extraordinary shareholders meeting for the 25th. He's presenting the power of attorney to authorize the issuance of new shares, diluting your stake to 5%. Once the board approves, he transfers the assets to the Cyprus holding. It's a textbook zakvat." "Let him call the meeting," Alina said, her eyes flashing in the dim light of Mikhail's office. I need you to pull the hidden server logs. A year ago, Alina had suspected Anton of taking kickbacks from a trucking vendor. She had secretly installed a micro camera disguised as a smoke detector in his office, routing the footage to an encrypted offshore cloud server. I have the footage, Alina. It's all there, Igor confirmed a few days later. Clear audio of him and Vika discussing the fraud, the offshore accounts, and dumping you in the sanatorium. Good. Prepare the criminal filings for the prosecutor's office. Have the procuratura ready to move. Alina paused, looking at the peeling green paint of the sanatorium wall. Igor, I need you to send a car for me on the 25th. Bring my black Tom Ford suit. And Igor, bring a tailor for Mikhail. Mikhail, sitting across from her, raised a thick eyebrow. I don't wear suits. You do now, Alina said, taking a sip of her tea. You're my new head of security. The 25th of November. The 62nd floor of the Federation Tower in Moscow City. The Vanguard Logistics Boardroom was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. A massive slab of polished black marble served as the conference table, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a dizzying, godlike view of the sprawling Russian capital. Anton stood at the head of the table, looking like a king ascending his throne. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist. Vika sat to his right, wearing a tight crimson dress, trying and failing to look like a serious executive. Around the table sat the 6 minority shareholders and the board of directors, mostly older men, cautious and greedy. Gentlemen, Anton said, his voice ringing with practiced authority. As you know, my wife, Alina, suffered a tragic accident. The doctors have confirmed she is mentally incapacitated. Retrograde amnesia. She is, for all intents and purposes, no longer with us in mind. He sighed, a perfectly calibrated sound of masculine grief. However, the company must survive. I have here a notarized General Naya Doverenost granting me full authority over her 80% stake. Today, we vote to restructure the holding, issue new shares to our Cyprus partners, and secure Vanguard's future. He placed the thick legal document on the black marble. Let us proceed with the vote. The heavy, soundproof double doors of the boardroom did not just open, they were shoved violently apart. The entire room froze. Alina walked in. She did not look like a trembling invalid. She wore a razor-sharp black Tom Ford pantsuit that fit her like a suit of armor. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon. Her lips were painted a dark, blood red. She moved with the predatory, silent grace of a Siberian tiger entering a pen full of sheep. To her left was Igor, the bulldog lawyer, carrying a thick leather briefcase. To her right was Mikhail. He looked spectacularly uncomfortable but undeniably lethal in a tailored dark suit that stretched over his massive shoulders. His rough, scarred face and dead-eyed stare made the expensive corporate security guards in the hallway look like schoolboys. Anton's face did not just go pale, it turned the color of old ash. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the marble table. The Patek Philippe watch clattered against the stone. Alina, Anton choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. You're supposed to be in the glush? Alina finished for him, her voice echoing off the glass walls, cold and resonant. Eating unsalted porridge and waiting for my brain to rot while you steal my life? She walked slowly down the length of the table. The board members shrank back into their ergonomic leather chairs, terrified by the sheer aura of violence radiating from her. Vika leaped to her feet, her face twisted in panic. Security, get her out of here. She's crazy. She's mentally unfit. Igor stepped forward, slamming his leather briefcase onto the table. He pulled out a stack of documents. Under Article 177 of the Civil Code of the Russian Federation, Igor barked, his voice booming like a cannon. Transactions signed by a citizen incapable of understanding their actions can be invalidated. We filed the lawsuit this morning. But more importantly for you, gentlemen of the board, Igor threw a medical file onto the table. You, Anton, submitted sworn medical affidavits stating Alina was mentally incapacitated at the exact moment you made her sign that power of attorney. The Economic Security Police have already opened a criminal case for fraud, using your own medical submissions as absolute proof of premeditated malicious intent. Anton gasped for air like a fish thrown onto dry land. You set me up. You faked it. You remember everything. Oh, Anton. Alina smiled, a terrifying shark-like baring of teeth. I remember things you don't even know you did. She pulled a small, silver flash drive from her pocket and tossed it onto the black marble. It slid perfectly across the polished stone, stopping exactly an inch from Anton's trembling hands. Track 3, Alina said smoothly. Audio and video of you and Vika in your office, planning a hostile takeover. Track 4, you transferring company funds to a personal offshore account. Track 5, well, track 5 is just a rather pathetic video of you and Vika on my leather sofa, which frankly, I'm going to have burned. Vika let out a small, strangled sob and buried her face in her hands. Alina leaned across the table, her face inches from Anton's. She could smell his fear. It was intoxicating. The Procuratura, the state prosecutors, are currently waiting in the lobby downstairs with a warrant. Alina whispered, loud enough for the terrified board to hear. Fraud, embezzlement, and attempted corporate raiding. You're looking at 10 years in a penal colony in Siberia, Anton. I hope you like pine trees. I've spent the last 3 weeks looking at them, and let me tell you, they get very boring. Anton's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, weeping openly, his meticulously styled hair falling over his sweaty face. Alina, please, please, I have nothing. If you take this, I'm destitute. We were married. Have some mercy. Alina stood up straight, smoothing the lapels of her suit. I did have mercy, she said coldly. I didn't have my new friend Mikhail here throw you out the window. She turned on her heel, her Louboutins clicking sharply against the floor. Igor, process the terminations. Gentlemen of the board, anyone who voted with him today will be receiving a visit from my auditors tomorrow morning. Good day. 6 months later, the chaotic noise of Moscow felt like a distant memory. Alina sat on the wide, sun-drenched wooden veranda of a dacha, a traditional summer house overlooking the vast, quiet expanse of the Volga River. The air smelled of sweet meadow grass, hot pine resin, and wood smoke. She had sold 60% of Vanguard Logistics to a state conglomerate, retaining enough wealth to live 10 lifetimes, but shedding the crushing 24/7 weight of the empire. Anton and Vika were currently navigating the brutal, unforgiving labyrinth of the Russian judicial system, buried under mountains of debt and legal fees. The wooden screen door squeaked open. Mikhail walked out onto the veranda, carrying 2 heavy, faceted glasses of strong, pitch-black tea. He was wearing an old, faded t-shirt, looking completely at ease. He handed her a glass and sat down heavily in the wicker chair next to her, looking out at the glittering river. Alina laughed gently, a bright, genuine sound that belonged to a woman who had finally woken up from a very long nightmare. She leaned over, resting her head against his broad, solid shoulder. By the way, she murmured, watching the sunset paint the Russian sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. That corrupt chief doctor who framed you and took your license? The prosecutor's audit at his hospital wrapped up yesterday. They found his offshore accounts. He's looking at the exact same 10-year sentence in Siberia as Anton. Mikhail paused. He looked down at his glass, a slow, dark smirk spreading across his rough, scarred face. He simply grunted in approval and took a loud sip of the hot tea. So I was right, he said. I should have thrown Anton out the window. Now they're going to share a bunk. Alina smiled, closing her eyes as the warm river breeze washed over them both. No, Alina murmured softly. We leave the trash in the city. Out here, we only build.
In the end, corporate parasites end up in Siberia. Real power doesn't wear a Rolex. It drinks black tea from a faceted glass on the quiet Volga. Thank you for watching. See you in next video.